Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to this Greenhouse Project webinar today titled To Build or to Renovate? That is the question. It's been a question that has come up often in conversations talking with people across the country. My name is Debbie Wiegand, and I'm the Director of Operations for the Greenhouse Project. And with me today is Rob Simonetti, Architect and Design Director for SWBR in New York. Rob is a friend to Greenhouse and comes with valuable insights and experience in the senior living industry, in addition to designing several greenhouse homes across the country. So welcome, Rob, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Rob, share with us a little bit more about your background and how long you've been involved in senior living design.
I'm an architect approaching 30 years in architecture and have been working in senior housing for about 18 or 19. Ever since I joined SWBR. Actually, one of my first projects here was new to me, a skilled nursing home that was looking to convert their very institutional model to a household model back in 2001, and that really got me hooked on the occupancy, and I've really been working in senior housing since.
Well, thank you so much for that. I know that there'll be a lot of great information that you have to share with us today based on that experience. And I believe congratulations are in order for being named the president for the Society for the Advancement of Gerontological Environments. I was wondering if you could just tell the group who's listening a little bit about SAGE.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's a mouthful, isn't it? So SAGE for short. So SAGE is a group, membership-based group. Like to consider ourselves a group of like-minded individuals who are really pushing on with the advancement of physical environments for older adults. So our group consists of providers, generally sort of CEO suite on the provider side, architects, interior designers. We have regulators in the group, as well as educators, and then a group of manufacturers and consultants to the industry that all come together and put our heads together about how we can advance the state of elder care. So each month, SAGE has a webinar that's free to members, an education webinar. We do an annual post-occupancy evaluation where we go out to an existing community and with a sort of a multidisciplinary team, go through the community and talk to elders, family, staff, administration, how the environment is impacting the elders and how it's performing. And then we issue a white paper based on that POE. And then we're also very active at the Environments for Aging conference. So you'll see our members doing quite a number of the education sessions there. And we have a number of other initiatives, design-based initiatives throughout the year as well. So it's a great group. It's a group I've enjoyed working with that I continue to learn a lot from.
Well, we appreciate your leadership in that. I know that it is an organization I have certainly enjoyed getting to know so many people who bring such a great deal to the field and shape what long-term care, senior living environments can look like. So we appreciate that. I think we'll go ahead and jump into our webinar and get started today. Today's webinar really looks at market trends in the senior living industry. We're going to also have a discussion about the Greenhouse Project's 2.0 endeavor. Then we'll launch into considerations around when to build new and when to renovate, and then take a look at some case studies that help to inform that process before we wrap up with a few lessons learned. So it's nice to often start, and it's helpful to understand where we've been, where we are today, before we begin charting a path forward. And that really begins to start with some market trends and the experience that we are able to draw from. Therefore, we're going to begin today by taking a look at some occupancy trends. Isn't it interesting that although we know and understand there's an increase in our aging population, skilled nursing occupancy has steadily been decreasing, as we can see in this graphic on the left. The most recent numbers show an all-time average low occupancy rate of 82.4% across the United States. And there are many competing factors impacting this number, such as the assisted living alternatives that are available, home and community-based services, and knowing that 95% of Americans state they don't want to live in a nursing home. So then look at the contrast of that average against the greenhouse model, which has had a steady occupancy rate between 97 and 98%. The next slide looks at the market. The next slide looks at the market as it begins to indicate that economics are certainly at play. We're showing here a decrease in the overall private pay census tract, and traditional nursing homes have shown really a continual decrease in being able to attract private pay clients, now at an average of about 8.7% across the United States. Again, a private pay client will generally have more options, and they tend to not choose the option of traditional nursing homes, which is why you see that number continuing to trend downward. And again, conversely, the greenhouse model shows that it is able to capture about 50% of the market around private pay, and that's likely due to its radical departure from the traditional nursing home features and functions. So as private pay clients are afforded more choice, on the next slide, the industry is experiencing higher utilization via Medicaid clients. And this graph shows an average increase across all the nursing homes related to Medicaid as really that primary payer source, which is now trending upwards to about 66.6%. Again, in contrast, within the greenhouse model, the average Medicaid census has been holding at around 47 to 48%. So traditional nursing homes are definitely finding it more and more difficult to compete for the private pay clients. And really, I think this then begins to take us to looking at our marketing experience before we jump in to the conversation about whether to renovate or build new. So the greenhouse market itself, the greenhouse project, is really spreading across the United States. Currently, it's in 32 states with several more in development. And I know that we continue to see continuing care retirement communities thinking about revitalizing their campuses as it relates to long-term care by looking at reducing the number of skilled beds, long-term care beds, and either building small homes such as the greenhouse model, or sometimes thinking about renovating into smaller neighborhoods or households. So those are some of the things that we're beginning to see. And Rob, I know SWBR knows the senior living market well, and you've been involved in bringing both new construction and renovation forward. Is there anything you would comment on related to the trends that are impacting how architects in senior living are designing at this time?
Well, I think across the continuum of care, we see more and more environments moving away from the image of senior housing and moving more toward what anyone would like for a great living environment. So almost, market rate environments. So that's one thing we see, which is wonderful. And another thing I see our clients sort of dealing with is the advancing age of occupants coming into any of their communities, be it skilled nursing, assisted, or independent, and how that movement, that upward trend, is really affecting the environments they create and the services they provide, and how it seemingly is moving pretty quickly. What was going on 10 years ago is now changing. So watching our clients react to that is interesting.
And I presume that in addition to that average age increasing, the level of acuity is probably higher than what it used to be, whether that's for assisted living or in long-term care.
Right, absolutely.
Well, I think all of those things really help to set and frame the conversation of where we've been and where we are, and helps to inform, as I said earlier, the path forward.
So SWBR has been lucky enough to be involved with the greenhouse project for about a dozen years, specifically. And I, in particular, have been the project architect on those projects here in the office. I, in particular, feel really honored to be part of that. These are just a few slides of some of the projects we've worked on, again, as background to today's session. Our first project was in Rochester, New York, with St. John's Home. Again, I'm lucky here. I live local to this project, and so it's a great organization that really pushes on the greenhouse model and takes it, right to the edge, and really operates it just as I think the greenhouse would love it to see it operated as a model. And so we often hear in the news what's going on at St. John's, and just I think just 2 weekends ago they had one of their elders out on her first motorcycle ride of her life. So that was in the news and fun to see. We worked recently with St. Elizabeth out in Rhode Island. They opened 4 homes, greenhouse model homes, in 2017, and those were the first new licensed skilled nursing beds in Rhode Island in some 30 years of moratorium that were granted to St. Elizabeth under the state's new resident-directed home program. And the thought really is that St. Elizabeth was granted those because of their pairing and partnering with the Greenhouse Project. So there, after 10, 12 years of working with Greenhouse and lots of lessons learned along the way, not just from our clients, but from other greenhouse operators and small house operators here in Rhode Island, I think we were really able to bring everything together to really create a really strong residential environment, well suited to New England, that St. Elizabeth has really been able to operate wonderfully, and they were far along in their culture journey way before we got together with them. So we were able to build an environment that that perfectly suited their culture and allows them to provide care just the way they want to. So that's been a fun project. And then just this week, Hover Senior Living in Colorado got their final state approvals to open 4 greenhouse homes in Longmont. So this week they will start moving elders into those homes. So we'll look forward to hearing compelling stories about how that's impacting the community at Hover and as well as Longmont. Then some of our small house model work, we've opened homes in Oregon, a big project in New York, and we've got a very long-standing project with the VA that hopefully after 10 years we're just about to start to break ground on 10 small house homes for them. And then in development, we've got projects, greenhouse projects in development in Vermont and New York and Massachusetts, and my favorite right now, sorry to all my other clients, but is in Bermuda. So that's been a great one to be involved in. But always great clients who think about culture change, who think about either greenhouse model or small house model or bringing something new to their community. Those are always really wonderful clients to work with.
Well, and it's great to hear and see how culture change is really beginning to penetrate outside of the United States, and having our friends in Bermuda continue to move that process forward. That's really great news, and again, you've done some terrific work. Those are beautiful pictures. At the Greenhouse Project, we've been asked, how do you support organizations that may not always be able to build new, but want to implement some deep system changes and really take some big steps, some substantive steps towards culture change? So this is a new and exciting territory for us, which we call Greenhouse 2.0. And as I know you're going to get into some of these upcoming slides, Rob, in conversation, not every organization always has land to be able to expand, or perhaps they don't have the capital dollars to put into buildings, a lot of new type construction or renovation, and yet that doesn't have to impede cultural transformation. So what I want to show you in the next few slides are some examples of organizations that we've begun working with that have really taken and embraced cultural transformation. So the next slide shows an organization called Village on the Isle. They're in Florida, and they began their cultural transformation work by looking at their assisted living community and really thinking about the greenhouse core values, the design principles that they could bring forth and create really some nice small spaces, such as the dining room, the kitchen, the living room area, with an accent on using natural light, which is so prominent in Florida, and ensuring there was a really nice way for elders to have access to most of the spaces. And what they did, it's a multi-story community. They basically gutted each floor and then began with the re-envisioning of what it could look like and what it should look like. So again, we've worked with them in not only the design aspect, but then how do you bring forth the essence of a real home, meaningful life, and empowered staff. And they're on their journey. They're by no means finished. This community for assisted living is certainly up, open, and operating. And now they're beginning on their skilled nursing. So we have a lot of excitement brewing on that campus, and a lot more to come that we'll hope to share with you in the near future. The next organization I would highlight is Sarah Newman. And Sarah Newman is located in New York. They conducted renovation a number of years ago, and we worked with them to look at how they could create small households. And they basically broke down a large institution and made it into households of 13 elders each. And so again, they incorporated a lot of the design and the practices along with our education to create some truly powerful elder and staff outcomes that they measure and they continue to measure today, and they're doing very, very well. So I think it's critical to really vision and frame the possibilities within a traditional setting, such as is shown here. Each organization that we've worked with really came from a traditional type perspective with a lot of long corridors and predominantly double rooms, as is the standard in traditional settings. You can see here that they've gone from rooms that have double occupancy to single occupancy, and one of the things that we hear from elders is how important it is to have that type of privacy. The next slide shows really the ability to incorporate features that begin to say this is home. The kitchen there looks like something you would probably see at your or my home, and whether it's a full functioning kitchen or a serving kitchen, being able to have those smells and sounds and the sight is incredibly helpful in creating home, along with a dining table that certainly emphasizes non-institutional type furniture and non-institutional cues. Everything from the way the furniture is laid out and designed, the lighting, the fixtures that you see in the ceiling, all of this helps to become reality by recognizing the market factors that cause people to either shy away from long-term care or be attracted to it. And so I go back to those original market trends that show how many people are not moving into skilled care until the very, very end or necessity, and how different types of environments might interact to help increase occupancy, but also have a balanced approach to the Medicaid and private pay markets. So this takes us to our question, which is what we started off thinking about: to build or to renovate? That is the question. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rob here for a little bit, and love to hear what you have to say about that.
All right. Thanks, Debbie. You know, as an architect, we're generally not faced with the question from the client, hey, should we build or should we renovate? We're often given the statement, we are going to build or we're going to renovate. But what we find is along the way, as we study any project, that opportunities may arise, and you really need to keep your eyes open and keep your ears open and keep your heart open to doing something different than you may have originally intended. And we've seen some good projects shift gears, either to renovate and to then go to building new, or vice versa, to good results. So in any project, we always ask, what are the core values of the project? So when we're working on a greenhouse project, the greenhouse ideals are well stated: meaningful life, real home, and empowered staff. And we always try to keep the core values of the project right in front of us, with the design team and with the owner at all times, so we can always measure our design solutions and move in the direction we're headed against those, and redirect when we need to. So if it's not greenhouse ideals, it might be just the mission and vision statement of the organization, or there may have been direction that has come out of a strategic planning initiative. And so it's those things that the design team really wants to know and capture, and again, keep in front of the full team. So again, we'll use the greenhouse as an example, but when we start to study an environment, often if we're asked to look at an existing environment to see how we might renovate it or consider building new, we'll look at things from the inside. What moves best support all those three ideals of the greenhouse or of the organization: corridor configuration, resident travel and autonomy. How are the staff moving about the home or the household, and how are they engaging with residents? Service, how are we getting things in and out of the building, including visitors? Daylight and views, and what's our access to the outdoors? Because that's critical in any environment. So we'll look at these measures, and we'll keep them again on the page at all times, so that no matter what we're doing, we're always looking back and considering along these metrics. And we'll do the same from the site standpoint, whether building new or for renovations. So again, if we were building new, we might really be looking at the site constraints and the context and how we're going to fit in. How are we going to create community if we're creating small house homes? How might those homes fit into the community, or how might they create their own community if there's enough of them? And while they're creating community, how do they maintain some autonomy and individuality, so residents can have ownership and staff can have ownership of particular houses? What's the home entry sequence? How do we get to the site and into the home? And there we'll oftentimes look right from the road. How do we get there? It's not once we get to the front door that we want to create a beautiful environment. It's the sequence of spaces even leading up to the home, because that really will influence how people act when they walk through the front door. And it's these that you might often not consider when you're doing a renovation, but I would argue that maybe you should. If you're really going to put value to a renovation versus a new build, you should measure along the same metrics. So how is our existing building, even if renovated into a household, addressing sequencing and autonomy and community? So we can look at three case studies, one where there was a decision to renovate, one to build and one where there's a decision to both build and to renovate. So our first is in Massachusetts, working with a provider who wants to bring greenhouse homes there. So they actually invested in and purchased a skilled nursing building. So it's here, bound by that red line is essentially the property. So you can tell even from the air that this is probably a building that is a double loaded corridor. So my initial reaction was like, wow, how are we gonna make that into a small house or a greenhouse model home? So we start looking at the plan itself and bring up our design issues and really start considering, well, what's the existing home like and what's the context and how have they been operating it. And here, luckily, they had a home that, although it was licensed, let's say for 50, they had always been using the rooms as singles, and so they were operating with just 34 residents. So they were already operating all their bedrooms as singles. And this client did want to build right away. They wanted to implement a greenhouse model and bring that to the state and show it off. But as we start to look at site constraints, that's going to be pretty tough. How do we fit it? And there's topography. And then when we look at the building and really start studying, it's like, this might work. And so we'll go through and create a series of vignettes studying how we might start to break up that more institutional 1960s home into households. So we start to break things up a little bit. We start to introduce the hearth room areas, and we go through many options, A, B, C, D, E. I don't know where we landed exactly, but we landed with, after studying some costs, let's renovate, because here this building in particular is well suited to, with not significant renovations, being able to really implement great person-directed care in an environment that will support it. So this construction has not started. This operator is still sort of getting their feet wet before they start renovations. They really want to get to know the home and the staff and the elders there. But soon, hopefully, we'll start to consider how they can convert some of those existing spaces into the more home-like and small home-like environments that we might see in a greenhouse model. These spaces in particular are at a nursing home in Buffalo, New York, that 10 years ago we worked with them to renovate their 272 skilled nursing beds into a series of, I think, 10 or 12 households. And so these are the resulting images. And these types of spaces that I think we could see implemented very well at that provider's home in Massachusetts. So although I would always love to build, it's not always the right answer. Our second case study is an ongoing project right now with a provider in New York who in the spring came to us and said, hey, we've applied for a grant and gotten a grant to do some renovations at the building. And we've got a little bit of money of our own set aside to add to that. So we'd like to do an addition which connects two wings of the building that we've always had some, sort of dead end circulation with. So we've got our what they call their B wing and their A wing. This is a 1960s original skilled nursing building with a 1994 skilled nursing addition around it. So the charge was to build a two-story addition with some 13 new single occupancy beds, which would allow some of the other bedrooms in the home to be converted to singles. And we want to, create some new great environments and allow us to start to run some new programs. So they have a subacute program they would like to expand, and they would like to consider a hospice and palliative unit in the mix. So similar to the other project, we start by studying the existing building just to understand what's the circulation, what's the flow, what are the existing units, to see how this current environment is really supporting resident centered care and the type of care that this operator wants to provide to their community. Again, I always use these same metrics because they're good for really any environment. So from there, we start our process of multiple schemes, and as had been described in the grant application, it was the charge was to connect the A and B wing. So here we start making those connections, and we went through multiple options. I'll just show a couple. It doesn't really matter. We probably had 10 or 12, and even started to consider, well, what if we put the addition somewhere else off the building. But ultimately, as we studied each of those, we were just struggling with it, starting to think about construction issues. What's going to be like for the residents and the staff as we start to thinking about an addition and then conversion of one unit type to a different. What's the phasing going to be like in a fully occupied building, and that's going to lead to construction duration. How long will the project be, and cost? What's it going to cost to do this? This is a 2-story steel frame skilled nursing building, so 20-year vintage, 25 years. So it's reaching the point where many of the systems are going to need to be considered. So it's sort of that hornet's nest. What are we going to get into once we open up a floor or ceiling? And what's the resulting environment? And that was a big thing that we started the question. No matter what we do at the end of that wing to connect wing A with wing B, we're creating essentially another double-loaded corridor. We're just extending more of the same. So we at SWBR scratched our head, and then we did what maybe we shouldn't have done, but we threw out to the provider, the owner, the what if option. This is something you haven't considered. You didn't ask us to consider this, but what if we just build a couple of homes across the way? And as a matter of fact, there's a big parking lot here, and I was like, hey, let's put the homes in the parking lot. So if we can build residences for 30 beds, 2 homes, maybe connected, maybe they're rehab, maybe they're hospice. Now we can start that construction nearly immediately as soon as we get approvals, not affect anyone inside the building as that construction is being done. That will give us swing space. When that's done, people can move in, and we'll have 24 to 30 residents out of the building, and then we can start to use those empty spaces as swing space to do more limited renovations without impacting everyone in the building. And we know from experience that the single-story wood frame, even skilled nursing occupancy, is relatively inexpensive compared to steel frame construction. So we started to question that, and the owner didn't kick us out. That was nice. Nothing they had ever considered on a very tight site, but they scratched their head about it, and they came back the next week and said, well, sort of like it, okay, but we're in New York. We got to be connected. So can we do a small house and connect it to the building, and maybe we can do OT in there? So again, happy that we didn't get kicked out of the room, but not exactly what we were hoping for. But we did study this, but luckily there were some really intense grading issues, which really made this not particularly feasible. But with a little bit more time and a visit to a greenhouse home in Rochester, the owner then came back around with their what if. And they said, hey, what if we forgot to tell you that there's a piece of property here in yellow that we also own or own most of that we can maybe develop, and what if we build 3 houses out there instead of the 2 you suggested? So this is where we are now. We just received pricing back for the additions and renovations at the conceptual level, and I think it's pretty interesting. This is in upstate New York with a contractor who's extremely well versed in senior housing, and they've looked around, and we're going to be looking at pricing of about $245 a square foot for a new build single story wood frame greenhouse home or small house. Inside the building, we're going to be looking at renovation costs that vary, and we've broken those costs up into light, medium, and heavy renovations. So light being we're going to paint and paper, we're going to change finishes and flooring, maybe some lighting, resident bedrooms and hallways. Moderate renovations might be, let's take out the nurse station, let's move some of the main core spaces, but not too much. We're going to make charting stations. We're going to maybe start to address some of the larger systems, moving a little bit more walls, but not wholesale gutting in any way. And then heavy renovation might be that more gut-like situation that Debbie described at the Villages on the Isle, where that would be at about $185 a square foot to really clear things out and to start to implement a completely new environment as best possible within the shell of the building. So I think that's interesting to gut, not even fully gut, and renovate is $185 a square foot compared to new build at $245. And in that gut situation, we're still not getting quite the environment we really want. It's not purpose built. And then we did ask, all right, if we were to do that A to B wing building addition, what would that be? And the answer was well above the 245. So just to do an addition in steel is going to be certainly more than the greenhouse homes. So at this point, this provider is now studying these costs, and I think that the cost for the greenhouse homes is very clear, and now it's a question of within the building, how much do we renovate? So here they were thinking about it and about renovating an addition, and they landed at new build with, of course, some renovation to come as well. And that might really be the case, and Debbie can describe this too, anywhere where a greenhouse or small house may be built, and then down the line it will eventually mean upgrading the legacy home, maybe to full household model or small house model, but at least to get some parity with those new environments created. And the last case study is St. John's in Rochester that did both. They both built and then fully renovated their legacy home. St. John's is a home as of 10 years ago when we started the project with them, about 545 beds in Rochester, right in downtown, next to one of the parks. A really great location, but a conglomeration of buildings from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s, now 6 stories, multiple buildings, multiple units for that 545 beds. So 10 years ago, when we started working with them, they had a brilliant idea to let's build the greenhouse homes out in the community. So we'll build pairs of 2 out in Greece and Gates and Rush and Mendon, and really decentralize our services and place those homes right back in everyone's community, so they don't have to come to our central location downtown. So that was fantastic. The one circled in red is the set of homes that I showed earlier that was built. This little smiley face is where I live, so I was really happy about the opportunity to have greenhouse homes surrounding me as I get older. That was fun to think about. So their idea, again, was to decant that existing building into pairs of homes spread around the community. So we built the 2, but then they really ran into issues with CMS saying, okay, if you're going to do that, you're going to need to create a separate license for every single one of those suburban locations. You can't just take the beds and move them. You need to create a license. So that was really a stopper for many years for St. John's as they puzzled on that. But then came back around to they were always planning on, in any event, to renovating the homes. And this is where we've landed for the last 5 years now. Have really looked at how to renovate, how to take all the lessons learned from their environments out in Penfield at those small houses, because they've got many lessons learned about the environment and materials and about staffing there, and they're now implementing those ideals at the home, and are actually now pretty well fully done with converting the entire 545 beds to the small house model. So this was tough. It was tough for them to think about how the heck do we even start, and where do we start. So a lot of prioritizing, and it was literally years. It was probably took us a few years to rationalize and prioritize a series of moves in that building to have the maximum benefit while distributing the cost over several years to make it palatable to get it done, all while, again, bringing autonomous function to the households, to the residents and to staff, creating great imagery of of residents in that small environment. So a couple of the biggest moves were, dealing with, how do you create a front door and what's the value of a front door. So how can we, look at that image of St. Elizabeth up in Rhode Island, great front door to a skilled nursing building. How do you translate that when you're looking at a building that's 6 stories? But what I think they did was really fascinating and had great impact in that large building where there was an elevator core. Typically, you got off the elevator, there was a nurse station directly ahead. Look left, you saw a lounge to one side of the unit. Look right, you saw a lounge to the other side of the unit. And those lounges were the living spaces for the elders. So what they did was simply enclose the elevator core with doors, a set of doors, a little bit more residential doors on either side. So when you got off the elevator, you're sort of in this foyer lobby space, with a little bit more residential furniture, a charting station for staff and someone to greet you. And then you entered into the household through these doors. And it made just a huge impact. Rather than getting off the elevator and lights and noise and being directly in a space and just being able to walk down the hall, now you have to walk through an entry door. And you change your actions, you behave differently. It's quieter, it's much different. And from the resident side too, just tremendous impact. Imagine being in your living room and having an elevator in your living room, and you never know who's going to get off the elevator when the bell rings. So now they have a door, people knock, people are greeted, and they come in and they can have their privacy in their home. So that one move was really, really incredible. And then they did we brought decentralized kitchenettes and dining to each of these spaces. Again, taking all those lessons learned about the environment out at the greenhouse homes and now applying them back to the legacy home. And again, I believe they're fully done with those renovations and now starting renovations on some of their common spaces down on the first floor to bring more resident amenity spaces to their common areas as well. So our lessons learned, I think one of the biggest things we've seen is, again, exploring all those opportunities, not dismissing anything too early on. If you've got your heart set on building 2 homes, well, maybe don't plan on it yet. Just let your team explore many options. If you've got your heart set on renovating, really listen to the team, particularly if you're renovating. Bring in a contractor into the fold, onto your team, who's had a lot of skilled nursing experience or who's had a lot of senior housing experience, because they're going to bring invaluable experiences to the real impacts of renovating a building and how to do it and what we're going to find and what it's really going to take, and they'll be able to help with the phasing. So that's critical. Again, always keeping in mind your core values, stating them right up front. What are the goals of this project, and what are the metrics that we're going to use to measure success at the end? State them, write them down, keep them in front of everyone, and being realistic with budgets. Well, how do you be realistic? And I think that's where listening to your team is important. That's where the realism will come. Getting that contractor or a construction manager involved early, who's had experience and who can help guide you, and listen to other providers who have done the same. One of the reasons I like working with the Greenhouse Project is that the greenhouse providers are always so open. If you visit and you travel and you see another greenhouse home or another small house environment, they'll tell you all about it. They'll tell you the mistakes they made, and all the positive things as well. They don't really hold anything back. So there's so much to learn there without reinventing the wheel. So that's part of, don't go it alone. Get a culture change organization, get the greenhouse, get an architect or a construction manager who's been through this before jumping in right away. Those are my lessons learned. Debbie, how about yourself? I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the Village on the Isle and what you may have learned from them about gutting a floor and all.
Well, it was a very interesting experience, to say the least. I think as I listen to what you've been able to share, certainly, some key takeaways are how important it is to go in with that open mind and listen to what people's vision is and ensuring that it's aligning with their culture, their values. So that's incredibly important. And then I think another takeaway is just that importance around the experience of someone in long-term care related to construction management, architecture, culture change. All of those things really can come together, I think, to help make the best informed decision as you move forward. You know, some of those things that you talked about when you're going through renovation, we often think that it's less expensive, and there are times when it can be, and that yet there are so many hidden costs associated with renovations, and much of it is unknown, such as, you know, potential cost overruns, the amount of time that it's going to take, what you might uncover with systems, unforeseen aging infrastructure. And then I think part of what I would tie into the experience that has been shared with Greenhouse is the impact of renovation on not only the staff that are working there, but most importantly, the elders who live there already and their families. It's tough to live through sometimes multiple moves in where your bedroom is located. That could also impact staff having to move around. So your normal caregiver may or may not be the same person. And I think that also then begins to impact occupancy. Most people, if they have a choice, they will wait to move in until after construction and renovation is complete, versus moving in while that's happening, unless it's a crisis situation. So there are some underlying considerations that don't always present and don't necessarily get pulled into the hard numbers around renovation. And I would say for Village on the Isle, you know, they were in a situation where they really did not have a choice because of the land lock that they were involved in, and they also had a number of people that they were caring for that they had to they didn't have another place to have them move to. So incurring that noise, and there were safety considerations that had to be a top priority all of the time, both for staff, for visitors, and most importantly, their elders. So there were a number of things that went into it. I think if you asked them, they would say, we wish we never would have had to do renovation, but they didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. Now that they've done it, they've got some beautiful, beautiful homes, and they are using a lot of the education that we've shared with them to really live out a real home with a meaningful life, and their operational practices certainly reflect how a staff can be empowered. So they've come a long way, and it was a tough road, but renovation's not easy, nor is new building.
No, they're both stressful. But there's always a problem. We always get through them either way. So
well,
yeah, I'm excited for all organizations who are thinking about renovating or building, just that they're thinking about the elder and their market and how to best serve people and how to keep their staff, you know, engaged and providing the best environment for their staff as well. It's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to remind those of you on the call that we have you have the ability to send in a question, and we've got a couple of them. So, Rob, I'm going to read these out loud, and between the two of us. We'll see if we can't answer them a little bit. The first one
Okay.
says, as far as new construction, are there coastal construction models? I have an older brochure showing urban, rural, suburban, but no coastal. So coastal construction models.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what might mean by coastal, but if I were to say the closest we've gotten to coastal is those homes in Rhode Island were right near the coast. So they had special characteristics for the building code for wind and stuff like that. But they are a home like any other. So I'm not exactly sure what the coastal question is, if it's a style of West Coast versus East Coast, but that model of greenhouse home can be suited to any, and that is exactly the point, to create a real home specific to the context. So if you haven't seen it yet, it may just be that there is not one built yet.
Right. And I guess I would add to that so there are a couple of thoughts, and again, I'm not quite sure what the coastal construction model is referring to, but we have an organization in Pompano Beach, which would be close to the Atlantic side, and I know for them they've done a mid-rise model, so it is 2 greenhouse homes per floor, and they're stacked. That organization, there are certainly hurricane codes that they had to build to, and yet when you go to those greenhouse homes, they very much feel coastal. They feel like you are right there in Florida, much like some of the other high-rises that you would see. And I would say, one of the things that we tend to emphasize, I know you do, Rob, is really looking at matching your architecture to the community that you're building in. So whether that is, the Eastern Seaboard or the Midwest or, the Southwest, you want that architecture to blend in.
Right.
There's another question. There's several here. How does a senior housing developer initially decide to take the plunge into investing so much time and money in an effort to implement such a significant culture change? I would say that's a big question. I think before anybody invests a significant amount of money and time, it's important to really spend time talking with people who do this. I tend to say seeing is believing, and so if it happens to be a culture change model such as the greenhouse, we do workshops, and it gives people a chance to see actual greenhouse homes in operation. And there are other organizations across the United States that are involved in culture change, and I would say start by talking to them. Most of them are really excited to share what their experiences have been.
Yeah, I would agree, Debbie. I've been to some of your the workshops, in particular in Mirasol in Colorado and in Midway, and seeing our client listen to those stories, was sort of transformative for them to understand, we're not the only ones that have gone through 10 years of desire here, that everyone's got a long story. So I agree, get out and visit as much as you can.
Here's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer is, but it says, is there a tipping point in terms of cost where it's better to look at replacement rather than renovation? That is the question.
Yeah, I guess I would think it's individual based on, any local economics, how old your existing building is, how conducive your existing building is to a renovation that would support person-directed care, what your local construction environment is like. There's some markets that are just crazy that you may not want to get involved in construction, where you may be able to do renovations a little lighter, lesser of a cost. So I do think, I don't know that I can say there's a tipping point. I would think it would be project specific to look at that. One thing we do note is that the cost of building new skilled nursing single story is significantly different than cost of building skilled nursing 2-story. So if you're in a market or a condition or a site that might necessitate a multi-story approach, either 2 or 3 story approach, that may be a tipping point, because a lot of the greenhouse homes and a lot of work that SWBR has done is in single story, where you can still do wood frame construction very economically for skilled nursing. But as soon as you go 2 stories, you're pushed into steel frame construction, non-combustible construction. Much different story.
Right. That's going to be much more costly. Here's another question, and probably Rob, you and I both can talk about this. It says, what is the most efficient layout for greenhouses? 4 houses with 10 elders each, as an example, assuming you start with a blank sheet of paper. So I guess I'll go first. I would say that we tend to find that in doing financial modeling, and it does depend on your state Medicaid rate, your cost of construction. So those are all factors. But we tend to see what I would call a sweet spot of about 6 homes, and I would say 6 homes of 10 or 12. It really depends on what your preferences are. But once you are able to hit that mark, it just feels like, from a staffing perspective and the amount of overhead that you incur. By overhead, I'll just use the example of you must have a licensed administrator, and you must have a director of nursing. You have to float those costs amongst a certain amount of homes. So we would say the sweet spot is generally 6. That's not to say that you can't do less than that. There have been some organizations that have done well with 3 homes. So somewhere between that 3 and 6 range. I think the other impact or the other variable would be, is this a single campus where you're just starting off new, versus are you talking about adding a couple of homes to an existing campus that has a legacy? That also impacts whether this will work financially based on those numbers of homes. Rob, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with you. We've had folks ask us to look at 2 homes or 1 home. Really tough to spread design costs, site development costs, construction manager costs to just 1 home is nearly impossible. 2 homes is very tough. If that's your situation, you have to do it. You have to do it. So we're seeing 4 homes. That feels good, 4 and above. And then you can start to think about the other spaces that might go along with 4 or 6 homes, like a small administration space or training area for staff. Not training area, but training building.
Mm-hmm. We've just got another couple of minutes, so I want to take 2 more questions. One is, are greenhouse homes zoned residential or commercial? I think it's safe to say they are zoned commercial. Would you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. They're I2 occupancy, even though happily they look like residences. They're
right.
commercial buildings.
The last question I'll take here is also, serving 14 to 16 people, do you need to have a commercial kitchen? I don't see any in your pictures. I'm glad that you don't see those commercial kitchens. What I would say is, whether you're serving 10, 12, 14, or 16, you don't have to have a commercial kitchen, and there are ways to design kitchens so that they don't have those commercial features, although we do look for commercial-grade appliances, but they look residential. So with that, I'm going to close up for the questions. I do want to leave you with the fact that we have another webinar that will be coming up soon. and there's our contact information. The next webinar we have is November 14th at 3 o'clock, and it's titled Best Practices in Fostering a Compassionate and Engaged Workforce, and that will be presented by Steve McAlilly, who is the CEO at Mississippi Methodist, and also he will be joined by Nikki Rainier at Holleran Consulting. So if you'd like, please register for that. And last but not least, we want to make sure that you're aware we have a new Facebook page, and ask that if you're following the old one, that you move over to the new page and see all the new exciting things that are happening. Again, I want to thank you. We will be sending out a recording and evaluation within 24 hours, so you will have copies of this, and there is our contact information. If you didn't get all your questions answered, feel free to reach out. And Rob, I just want to say a special thank you to you again for all your insight, wisdom. We certainly have shared a lot of that with us today, and we really appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Debbie.
Everyone have a good day.
Take care.